Was that Virginia as well?
That was Virginia as well.
What is with your state, Carl?
I remind you, the motto of the state is Virginia is for lovers.
Welcome to RealClearPolitics on SiriusXM for Monday, May 5th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, Donald Trump got a lot of attention for remarks he made on Meet the Press on Sunday, particularly when it came to his understanding of his obligations regarding the Constitution. Here's part of the interview with Kristen Welker of NBC News.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says
I don't know. It seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials.
Even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said. What you said is not what I heard the Supreme Court said. They have a different interpretation.
So, Tom, kind of a mixed message, I guess. He doesn't know about whether he should do the Constitution, but he says he'll follow the Supreme Court. What'd you make of the decision? And there's a big dust up about this, right?
I mean, so I was out all weekend. I was on vacation and I was blissfully unaware of the news. And so I get back and I'm reading headlines, and all I see these headlines, Trump says he doesn't know about he should support the Constitution. I mean, they were, I'm like, oh my God. As usual, the headlines are, meant to not only sort of titillate, but also, I think, cast Trump in the most negative light possible. So I'm like, I've been through this so many times. We've all been through this so many times. Your first reaction is, well, that's outrageous. He can't say that or whatever. And then you go, well, let me go watch the interview and see exactly what he did say. And it's, to your point, Andy, it's much, much different than that. It's much more nuanced than that. I mean, he's saying, look, I was elected to, on illegal immigration, on shutting down the border, on getting people out of here. He's not saying he doesn't have to follow the Constitution. In fact, he expressly said he would follow the Supreme Court. But what he was saying is, and by the way, I'm not sure Kristen Welker is no constitutional expert, and her saying that the Fifth Amendment guarantees everyone in the country due process, including those who are here illegally, that is not, I think, an accurate representation of what it is. So I think it's a sort of media creation and a dust up. It is a serious issue, and we've been talking about as well as everybody else has for the last 100 days, because these individual cases have raised interesting questions about due process and who gets it, who doesn't. How much should they get? Should they only get especially if you're here in the country illegally, and if you've committed crimes while you've been here in the country illegally? So, but this to me was just another example of the media doing what it always does.
Carl, did you see it that way?
I really hate to agree with Tom on this.
Carl.
Unlike Tom, who was blissfully golfing with his college friends this weekend, I watched that show, and I watched it again last night in preparation for this. Trump did, the headlines in the New York Times and everywhere else, Trump says answers I don't know when asked if he has to support the Constitution. And that isn't really what happened. What happened was Kristen Welker started by asking him, did he, you have these local district court judges who've thrown out some of these deportation orders. And he's saying, don't you have to follow that? And he said, well, I don't know. I got lawyers, looking into that. We're appealing that. We're challenging it. Trump's felicity of language is not the best. He could have pointed out, he said, Kristen, I've taken the oath of office twice. And the only thing that the president is sworn to do is uphold the Constitution. Of course, I'll do that. But there's a difference of interpretation here. I think that's what he meant, though. I agree with Tom. I think that's what he was saying. This idea, we talked about this last week, the idea that the Biden administration could then let in, 5 million people. Tom thinks it's higher than that. Trump only said 2 or 3 million, but whatever. And you can let them in en masse, but then you have to have a trial for each one to deport them. That doesn't even make sense. That doesn't even stand the laugh test. So that's what he was responding to. And she kept pressing on him. And finally she said, I thought I thought she did a good job on the interview. I don't really fault her. She's trying to flesh him out and see how far he's going to go in defying these judges and where his mind is. But she finally said, well, but would you uphold the Constitution? And he wasn't really saying, I don't know, I would uphold the Constitution. You say, well, no, look, I don't know about this. You've asked me. Their context is these deportations, these mass deportations. He said, I got these good lawyers. We'll follow the Supreme Court. So
Did you fall for it, Carl?
I didn't fall for it. No, because I'd seen the interview and I initially thought it was another interview, Tom. I think this was blown out of proportion. But Andy, what do you think?
Well, no, interesting. You should ask. I thought initially, like you guys, I heard the reports, and I saw one clip because I didn't watch Sunday morning. I was busy with family stuff. Actually, I was in church on Sunday. But
even better.
Yeah, but then I did. I went and watched the whole thing. The coverage was so breathless about it, though. I did think we should lead with it today. And Tom, it does raise sort of this question about Trump, which is, does he really believe in the Constitution? Or does he just see it as an impediment to getting what he wants done? Because
you're talking about the head of NPR now, Nancy.
I'm asking a question of Tom.
That is not the question that it raises, actually, Andy. The question it raises is, why is our media so corrupt they can't actually just report what he says in a fairly objective manner? Why do they have to twist it and distort it and try and make it into something other than it actually is? Now, that's my way of segueing into a media rant, but I always never get tired of doing. But look, I don't think the question is, does he believe in the Constitution? I mean, really, that seems pretty far-fetched to me. Again, these are the deportation cases have raised interesting questions about judicial overreach, about due process, and questions that are, I think, legitimate and need to be worked out. But I'm not sure that anywhere in there is this idea that Trump's just, wants to, tear up the Constitution because he can't get his way. And by the way, he does have a point that, he was elected to do this by the entire country, right? By a majority of the entire country.
Well, a plurality, if we're going to.
Plurality, okay. And I think it was it a majority?
I don't think he got 50%.
Carl? We'll check that stat. Anyway, the point being, and you have these unelected bureaucrats, lower court judges that are issuing nationwide injunctions, which seems very much a problem in terms of the way our system of checks and balances is supposed to function or not function in this case. And so all of those things are legitimate, but I don't think that means the question that we need to focus on is, whether Trump, that he's trying to trample on the Constitution. That just doesn't seem right to me.
Well, there's at least one person who kind of disagrees with you, and that's former Vice President Mike Pence, who was Sunday. He was in Boston. He was accepting the John F. Kennedy Profiles in Courage Award for his actions on January 6th. And here's a little bit of what he said about the Constitution.
The American people cherish our Constitution, and they cherish the liberties enshrined there, and I'm confident that the American people will rally around that Constitution once again, and I look forward to playing some part in that decision in the days ahead.
So, Carl, he didn't take a direct swipe at Donald Trump, but it's pretty clear what he was talking about. So I may not be the only person raising the question about Donald Trump and the Constitution.
Well, Mike Pence has an excuse that you don't have. On January 6th,
I didn't know I needed an excuse, but thank you.
On January 6th, 2021, I wasn't there. I was, directing coverage from our office, but I'm pretty confident there was no mob, no even single individual chanting, "Hang Andy Walworth." So this is personal for Mike.
Don't put any ideas in our viewers' minds, please.
Well,
good. Go ahead.
You're right. But Mike Pence, and I said this about Al Gore in 2000, I thought he behaved patriotically and heroically, not only that day, but in the aftermath, affirming the vote, doing all the things that Pence did. And I just, I think he has a right to feel ill-used by President Trump and to raise some of these issues. So I wouldn't fault him. I think, Pence has walked the walk. He's a very conservative guy. He was very loyal to Trump. And I think in his view, that loyalty wasn't returned, and that if you ask Mike Pence, my guess is he'd say that he thinks that Donald Trump's political ambitions, got the best of him, and that he let his ego override some of these other considerations. That doesn't mean that Trump doesn't believe in the Constitution, but and Mike Pence is being honored now this is an honor that goes to liberals. Now it's gone to a conservative, but why? Because it's the same way, like every once in a while a conservative columnist will win the Pulitzer Prize. Well,
Liz Cheney was unavailable.
Yeah, well, because he criticized, he or she criticized, Reagan or fill in the blank, Trump, but still, it's an award he deserved, and so I'd give him his day, and I'd not fault Mike Trump.
Tom?
Pence. Excuse me.
Oh man, I would take issue with the idea that, especially to Carl's point, speaking in front of this group, and this idea that, well, Donald Trump's the only one, he doesn't respect the Constitution, and he's the baddie, and Republicans are the baddies. Democrats just want to change the Electoral College and pack the Supreme Court, and they're really in favor of the Constitution and revere it. Give me a break. So, I think we have to be clear-eyed about this. And I agree with what Carl said. Mike Pence is in a unique situation. I'm not going to, fault the guy necessarily for accepting this award or giving the speech that he gave. But at the same time, let's not get carried away with particularly speaking to this crowd with a holier than thou attitude about who respects and reveres the Constitution and who doesn't.
Okay, well, just one more thing on this, which is going back to the NBC interview. And I hate to be in agreement with you guys at this point in this show, in this point in the week. This is bad if all three of us are agreeing on something.
It's only Monday morning.
I know. But Trump, the other thing he said in that interview that I thought was newsworthy was he kind of ruled out running for a third term. Saying that it was that the Constitution wouldn't allow him to do that. So, he was sort of, Carl, to your earlier point, he was saying that he would abide by norms, right, as we call them these days.
You know what, Andy, I'm glad you brought that up, because in the world as Tom Bevan imagines it, the world, the George Bernard Shaw world, where we dream things that never were and say, why not? An objective press would say, the headline on the lead story of the New York Times writing about that interview would say, Trump rules out third term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's in the agate. It's in the footnotes, if it's there at all in the media coverage. And I agree with you. And I that was the most newsworthy thing of that interview.
Tom, any thoughts on a Trump third term?
No comment.
Tom may want a Trump third term. You put him on the spot.
No,
I'm
perfectly happy with the way that the Constitution is set up. And look, some of these things are not going to happen, right? They're just not going to happen. And Trump could talk about them, right? We're not, we're not invading Canada. We're not turning it into the 51st state. Like, he'll mention it, he'll talk about it, but at some level it's trolling, and it's meant for us to, I think, and maybe in particular meant for some members of the media to sort of gnash their teeth and rend their garments, and because Trump enjoys watching them do that.
I hope you're not ruling out an invasion of Greenland. I'm kind of, that'd be a hell.
Carl's waiting for that. Hey, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. Don't go away. We'll be right back with more right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And guys, Republicans, they are trying to put together this budget deal. And one of the things they're doing is looking at Medicaid. President has insisted that he isn't going to touch entitlements, but there are deficit hawks within the party that would like to cap federal Medicaid payments. So, Carl, one plan is to limit the federal spending on a per beneficiary basis. And this would cut Medicaid over time. It would result in as much as $900 billion in savings over 9 years. That's according to the CBO. There's also the possibility of work requirements. None of this is politically popular. The Democrats are prepared to pounce. But what are the Republicans up to, and what can they get done?
Yeah, well, when you say these programs are popular, people, you did. I'd like Jay Leno to do his, walking in the streets interview and ask people if they know the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. You'd get some comical answers. The Republicans for years have talked about block granting Medicaid, which is to send the money to the states without requirements, giving the states already administer it, but giving them much more leeway in how they would spend that money. Doing a per beneficiary thing seems it would punish people in states with higher medical costs. And a doctor visit in Mississippi might cost $20, in New York City it might be $40. So that doesn't strike me as that will be the end result. But they're looking for a way. If you're going to do what they said we're doing, I've said this till I'm blue in the face. What Elon Musk said he wants to do, what Trump now says he wants to do, what deficit hawks have said since the Reagan administration they want to do is bring the federal spending in balance with the revenues. You're going to have to go to that third rail. And Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. These are the three programs you have to look at. And this, by dipping their toe in the water on Medicaid and floating some of these ideas, I think they're seeing, what the market will bear. But I wouldn't assume that the majority of the American people are really opposed to trimming some of this spending if it's done in a way that's fair, if it's done in a way that doesn't really hurt the beneficiaries. It has to be done, as the Wicked Witch used to say, delicately.
Well, Tom, the Democrats have declared May Fight to Save Medicaid month. They've targeted what they think are vulnerable Republicans on this topic. I think they have 4 races they're going after in particular, but they see this as a winning issue, obviously. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, a couple things. Number one, just you can see the divisions within the Republican caucus between the folks who are the sort of deficit hawks, and some of those folks are they're in much more secure districts than some of these other folks who are saying, look, we can't cut Medicaid. That would be bad for me personally and bad for the party politically. And I think broadly speaking, the Democrats do feel like this is a winning issue, and they have reason to feel that way. I mean, every time Republicans have tried this, remember George W. Bush trying to privatize Social Security, got his ass kicked, had to walk that back. I mean, every time there's any discussion about trimming any of these major federal programs, and it's always Republicans that are suggesting it and floating trial balloons here and there, they get their hat handed to them. I mean, they just absolutely, and because it's, even though you have data that says, yeah, people want to lower the deficit. Well, okay, but can we cut this program? No, you can't cut that. No, you can't touch that. And the minute someone tries to, it's very easily demagogued by the other side as, mean Republicans want to, take away Granny's health care. And so eventually they have to walk it back, and it never happens. I don't expect, so this cycle has been going on for years, for decades. And we can never get any sort of reasonable compromise between those two competing interests, right? Lowering the deficit, but also, trimming some of the, trimming some benefits, or doing something that makes these programs and actually would strengthen them in many cases and make them more viable over the longer term, instead of just running the crazy deficits that we're doing. So I think we've seen this movie before, and I think it's going to basically be a rerun and end the same way.
What about, though, work requirements, though, Tom? That would seem to me to be something that the American people would get behind. I mean, if you've got, it was popular broadly when Reagan talked about it with welfare.
Well, Andy, it's a feature of AFDC, whatever they renamed it. The
right.
Welfare payments, and this was Bill Clinton signed that law.
That's right.
And there are requirements. I don't know how rigorously they're enforced, but I think applying it to Medicaid is problematic. Medicaid typically goes to people who are poor, and they don't have, and to qualify for Medicaid, you can hardly have any assets.
Well,
then they have
could be medically disabled. I mean,
yeah, there's a reason they're getting Medicaid. A lot of them are elderly. And then I think a work requirement for Medicaid is almost like you don't really know what Medicaid is.
I saw one study that said there are 34 million able-bodied people on Medicaid. So,
where'd you see that?
well, I can't remember. I can't tell you right now.
I'm highly skeptical of that statistic. Just as I was skeptical.
Odds are it was in the Wall Street Journal if Andy's quoting.
I will get that for you. We'll put it in the footnotes. But Tom.
Wait.
Okay. Tom
said that in an earlier segment that Trump carried a majority of the vote. He came as close to majority as you can get. He had 49.81%. I looked it up during the break. He won all.
He counted those final votes in California 3 months after the election. He was over 50% for a very long time.
He won all the swing states. He beat Kamala Harris by 1.5 percentage points. It was a close election, but he won decisively. But when we throw out statistics, we should be careful. 34 million able-bodied people on Medicaid. We should dig into that and revisit this.
I will dig into that. But in the meantime, I want to talk about something close to home for you, Carl, and that's Virginia, which is they hold this gubernatorial election this fall, and the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor is in some trouble amid allegations that he maintained a social media account and he had sexually explicit content on it. Where have we heard this story before? Anyway, this is John Reed. He's Virginia's first openly gay candidate for statewide office. Glenn Youngkin, the governor, reportedly asked him to drop out. That didn't go over so well. But Carl, is this the kind of thing that the Virginia GOP wants to be dealing with before they go into what is certainly going to be a tough election fight this fall?
Yeah, well, they're probably going to have their hat handed to them anyway. But this is not helpful. And John Reed to me said, well, it's a homophobia. What if it was, the implication being if it was pictures of women, that it wouldn't be a problem. We know that isn't true because there was a Democratic candidate in the last election cycle who was on one of these websites showing herself having sex with her husband. Nothing wrong with that, in my opinion, but it wasn't helpful. It was in a close race, and she didn't win.
Was that Virginia as well?
That was Virginia as well.
What is with your state, Carl?
I remind you, the motto of the state is Virginia is for lovers.
Oh, God.
Oh, my God.
Well, Tom, this was in Politico today. I thought this was interesting. This is one Virginia Republican operative who was granted anonymity to speak freely, shrugged off the photos saying, hey, it's just a bunch of penises.
That's the quote of the year.
Oh, my God. Now, does the Reed say he didn't have anything to do with this? Or these are his photos?
I think he has denied it as far as I know.
Is he doing like a Joy Reid, like, time traveling, people hacked me back when, and I don't know why they're on my, there are two things to this, right? It's like, one, you wonder how, if he did have something to do with these pictures, right? And they were out there, you wonder how folks who run for higher office just think that they can kind of like that this stuff isn't going to come out, right? That they've had this stuff in their past and suddenly it's not going to come out. We saw this with we saw this in the North Carolina governor's race. I mean, it happens and you'd be foolish to think that you could get away with running for statewide office and not have something like this raise itself as an issue.
It's called the Tom Eagleton syndrome. Look it up, people. If you don't know.
And the other issue here is that we are just the de facto mode for politicians now is never apologize, never drop out, never give an inch. We don't have any shame anymore. I mean, if this was, if this happened in Japan, we might be witnessing Harry Carey or something. I mean, politicians are just, and this has been true for a while, but I think maybe Trump might have accelerated this trend because people have seen him just get away and be like, no apologies, double down. You hit me, I'm gonna hit you back harder. But you would think that this would be enough to sort of shame a person into being like, well, gee, maybe that wasn't the best decision, and I can understand why people. And yeah, now I'm going to be a drag on the ticket, and you know,
Can't use that word drag, Tom.
Sorry, but yeah, there's just people can
look,
do the craziest stuff these days, and just decide that they're never dropping out, no matter what.
That's because fame is monetizable, even notoriety.
Mm-hmm.
He could copyright the phrase just a bunch of penises and get a talk show after he loses. I mean,
all right. Well, on that uplifting note, I'm going to call time out. We're going to take a break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. Don't go away. We'll be back with more right after these words. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And, President Trump said on Sunday that he's ordering the Federal Bureau of Prisons to reopen Alcatraz, which has been closed for about 60 years now. This is in addition to the idea of today of providing $1,000 to each immigrant who would self-deport. These are both aimed at sort of helping get people get the immigration problem under control. He says he's going to reopen the prison to, quote, house America's most ruthless and violent offenders. The reopening of Alcatraz will serve as a symbol of law, order, and justice. So, Carl, good idea or not?
I win the drinking game. They're going to have to go through Gavin Newsom. Because California has strict environmental laws that looks like they would apply. That Alcatraz is interesting. It was named by a Spanish explorer. This was in the 1700s. Even then, Alcatraz was an archaic Spanish word for pelican, and the California brown pelican does not nest there anymore. But there are birds that do, and it's a very sensitive area. And so it was turned over in the late 60s. You guys may not. Well, Tom wasn't born yet, but it was a prison. Famous prison, infamous prison, supposedly picked because you couldn't escape from there, although people did escape from there. Two brothers did with another guy. They never found
Clint
their
Eastwood
body.
did.
What?
Clint Eastwood did.
Yeah, exactly. And that movie was called Escape from Alcatraz. Their bodies were never found. They're presumed drowned, but who knows? Maybe they're living with Martin Bormann in Argentina. But there was a guy who escaped from there. I forget his name. No, it's John.
Okay, Carl. We know about Alcatraz.
Okay.
Is it a good idea to reopen it?
No, no. It makes no sense as a prison. It's its own. First of all, it's now with the National Park Service. This will be in court like everything Trump does. It comes in the Golden Gate Recreation Area. They get like 1 million visitors a year. It's a real tourist attraction, but it doesn't make sense as a prison. First of all, in 1962, when John F. Kennedy was president, they had to remodel it. It was archaic and falling apart. And they said it would cost $5 million. That's in 62, so that'd be $100 million today. And there's no water on that island. You'd have to bring in all the water to build concrete, but then you'd have to always bring water in for the prison. So economically, it makes no sense as a prison. Symbolically, once again, Trump shows, he's got this genius for marketing, because he says we should put the worst people there. Well, that's who we always sent there. Bumpy Johnson went there. Al Capone, the guy who led the shootout of the Capitol, the Puerto Rican nationalists. We've always put the worst people there, and it's sort of a symbol. There was they locked up a guy. They used to put conscientious objectors there in World War I, and he wrote a book about it, like the Devil's Island. Uncle Sam's Devil's Island, I think, was the name of it. It's a forbidding place. As a symbol, it makes sense. Economically, it makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, Tom, I've been to Alcatraz. I took my family on a trip to San Francisco, and we visited. It's a great place to go, especially with your kids. The kids loved it. So I'm against it just because I think it's a great tourist thing to do.
Apparently, it brings in like $60 million a year in tourism funds. Right?
Yeah, I looked it up. It's 1.6 million a year visitors.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah. No, that 1.6 million visitors. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And it would cost $60 million just to bring water to the prisoners.
Well, and they said one of the reasons they closed it down, according to what I read, was because they were saying it was going to cost like $3 million a year just to keep it up. Right. There's the maintenance and all of that.
But you have to rebuild the prison first.
Right. So obviously it would make a lot more sense to pick a, piece of desert in the middle of California and build a prison there with all the latest technology and build it from scratch. And you could probably do it twice as cheap and make it twice as big and twice as effective. But to Carl's point, there's all of this history and symbolism behind Alcatraz, which makes it again, a way for Trump to, hammer home his message. And obviously people are like, that's so stupid. That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. But, from a top line reading, people are also like, oh, well, Trump cares about law and order. That's, that's on his mind. He's thinking about these things. Even if his idea wasn't maybe the greatest, where his priorities are. And that priority is in line with, I think, a lot of the American people.
I think that's a great segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which is this idea of putting tariffs on foreign films to make Hollywood great again. And that is not a message that I think people identify with Donald Trump, the idea that we're going to sort of save those liberals in Hollywood because they're facing unfair competition from overseas, Tom. So what do you make of that idea? Because these ideas sort of both came out about the same time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, on one hand, you're right. It is surprising that Trump's trying to save, all the liberals in Hollywood who hate his guts and want to see him gone and make all these stupid videos around election time about, the cringiest stuff ever made. But at the same time, it is it does fit into his overall theme of trying to sort of recapture the greatness of this country and make America great again. And whether that's, energy independence or any of these other things, there was a time where Hollywood was it was the center of the universe. In some ways it still is, but it's obviously fractured. And I guess the point being, we've got a lot of production going on in Vancouver now because it's just cheaper. It's cheaper to do it there. And
well, it's because it's subsidized up there.
Yeah, and they get these huge subsidies. Now, some of this, look, they're doing that in the United States. Georgia gives great subsidies, which is why you've got Trilith, the big studio down there. They're filming all the Marvel movies down there. But that's all obviously competition among states within the United States. And so to Trump, I think that's, way, way better than being, competition among international folks like who he considers are, competitors and in some cases enemies, like China.
Well, Carl, what do you think of the idea of making Hollywood great again by making it more expensive to import films, all films, I guess, from Europe, overseas?
Yeah. So, but his idea, if you can call it that, is that the these producers you're talking about wouldn't go to Vancouver, wouldn't go to Toronto. They're going to film, if you're going to make a movie in Cleveland now, or movies about Cleveland, they're typically filmed in Toronto. He doesn't want that. He wants them made here. All right. So far, so good. But European films are by nature only
by
dark,
definition.
By definition, European foreign films. You're going to do away with the foreign film category in the Oscars? I mean, how far are you going to go with this? That's where Trump.
I bet you if you polled that, you'd get a majority that would say they'd be fine with that, Carl.
Probably.
Trump wins again.
I'll tell you one thing about Vancouver films, just as long as we're on the topic. So I don't know if but there was a television series on the Hallmark Channel called Chesapeake Shores. Big series, ran for 5 years. And everyone out here where I live on the Eastern Shore of the Chesapeake Bay was excited about this. And then it turned out that they filmed the whole damn series in Vancouver, Canada. So you're watching this show and there's sort of like rocky mountains in the back, not mountains, but hills and stuff.
Yeah.
And then this was the worst, Tom. They have a crab feast, right? Chesapeake.
No.
And instead of eating blue crabs, they were eating Canadian snow crabs with the legs.
Yeah.
And everyone here just freaked out. It was so for no other reason than that, they should maybe rethink
authenticity
overseas. Yeah,
that's right.
But Carl, the other thing I was reading the commentary about this, and you got all these sort of arguments about it having to do with the fact that there's difficult supply chains and how are you going to count this and how are you going to count that, as if Hollywood just woke up and realized that that every supply chain is complicated. And it just showed the whole difficulty with the whole tariff the idea of tariffs because it's so hard today in today's global economy to figure out what you're going to tariff and how much you're going to tariff and who's going to benefit and who's going to get hurt.
Well, yes. And Andy, you and I have similar views about tariffs and about their efficacy. But Trump is not operating in that world when he talks about this. He's talking about politics. And you pointed out, these are not, Hollywood folks aren't very kind to Trump. They have no use for him. But, Trump likes good union jobs. He's not anti-union in the way some Republican presidents have been in the past. We did an event with him. We did an event when he was first elected during the transition, and we had the head of the steelworkers, the laborers union based in San Francisco. And I said to the guy, "You sound like you can do business with Trump." He said, "I have done business with Trump." And so, Trump's not a reflexive scab the way some Republicans are. And if you bring unionized jobs in the film industry back into Hollywood, the younger generations of filmmakers, and I know some of them intimately, they're going to notice that. So I'm not sure it's as crazy as it sounds.
Tom, is he's courting the Hollywood vote?
I don't think he's courting that. Well, look, Trump could cure cancer, and some of those folks would never give him credit or think he did anything worthy. But look, Hollywood's been suffering, and you talk about because of they've had these negotiations and strikes over AI and all these things. I mean, the productions now it's not flourishing the way that it once was, and you have a lot of folks who used to be making good livings in Hollywood, even as freelancers who had written on shows for 20, 30 years. I mean, I go to the LA Times every day as part of my media diet, and I look at the op-ed page, of course, but also in the front page, and you can't go 3 days without seeing a story about how one section of Hollywood or another, it's the writers, it's the union workers, as Carl said, it's the folks behind the scenes that are suffering, and they're moving out because there's just no more work for them, or they used to be able to afford a nice living, and now they're working like 2-3 jobs to just try and make ends meet. So Hollywood's been suffering, and to the extent that this would help rebuild Hollywood, I think that would be probably a good thing if it's an idea that would work, and the people there would probably appreciate it, even if they probably wouldn't give Trump credit for it.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl Cannon and Tom Bevan. Don't go away. When we come back, Tom's going to talk to Richard Porter.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by our good friend Richard Porter. He's a contributor to Real Clear Politics, former RNC committeeman from the state of Illinois. Richard, how are you? Good to have you back.
Tom, how are you?
Good. So we're going to give people a preview of tomorrow's front page on Real Clear Politics, because we have an article that you wrote about J.B. Pritzker, and it's going to be paired with an article that Perry Bacon wrote in the Washington Post, sort of lauding J.B. Pritzker and his speech that he gave in New Hampshire. It was like a week ago or a week and a half ago. So you took a different tack. Richard, tell us, what did you think of that speech?
Well, I was struck how the media was talking about what a bravura performance it was, and stirring, and a great call to arms for the Democrat to rally around. But what I wanted to know is, how did he end up with that statement calling on Democrats everywhere to be haranguing Republicans not to give them a moment of peace? So I went back and I read the speech. It's something I've learned you need to do in this day and age, is see what people actually said. And what I found so striking about it was just filled with falsehoods. And my first thought was, well, it's hyperbole. Political hyperbole. Isn't that just part of the political process? But hyperboles are untruths that both the speaker and the listener know are untrue. They know that that's part of the show, if you will. So think about Jerry Seinfeld calling the soup maker the soup Nazi. No one thought he was actually a Nazi. It was sort of funny. The viewers and Jerry, everybody knew it was in on the joke. And then you have things like Jesse Smollett, who asserted that he was assaulted by some MAGA bros and that put a noose around his neck. Well, that was just false. It was completely false. It wasn't hyperbole. He stated hoping people would believe it. It was a lie. And then the other type of untruths are untruths that both the speaker and the listener believe, and that's a delusion. And what I was intrigued by was when you look at the things he said, like, for example, how no senior deserves to be left destitute because of Elon Musk's cuts to Social Security. Is that a lie or is that a delusion? I mean, because there are no cuts to Social Security that's going to leave any senior who's entitled to Social Security destitute. I mean, it's just completely made up. It's not true. It's not hyperbole. It was a statement made with the hope that listeners would believe it to be true, right? That's either a lie or a delusion. So that's what I think is most interesting about J.B. Pritzker. Is he just a liar or is he deluded? And what's it say about the Democratic base? You know, I read Perry's piece, and he's celebrating J.B. Pritzker's speech, but he's never grappling with the ultimate question of, was anything he said about Trump true? Doesn't that matter? And maybe you could say it was true, but it was hyperbole, but that would mean you actually didn't believe the things he was saying, that seniors weren't going to be left destitute by a cut. I think ultimately people do crave authenticity and they crave truth. And I think this is what Perry's missing, is it matters not just how enthusiastically you assert the need to fight Donald Trump, but also whether the bases you're claiming, the things you're saying Donald Trump is doing, there ought to be some element of truth in that.
I assume, Richard, that line that you just mentioned about cutting Social Security is probably a big applause line for J.B. Pritzker. I mean, I watched the section of the speech, the clips of him calling for no moment of peace or whatever, but he got a standing ovation. I mean, he was enthusiastically received by that crowd, and as you mentioned, by the media sort of writ large for that speech. That would seem to me, I do think that the Democratic base, they believe this stuff to be true. They believe that Donald Trump is an authoritarian. Remember, leading up to the election, this was the last election we would ever have. I honestly believe some people thought that to be true. I certainly think that some people thought that wasn't true, and that was just they were telling that to people to try and scare them into believing it, but people didn't really actually believe it.
You know, J.B. Pritzker went out of his way to kind of build the case that the Republican Party today taking power was a lot like the Nazi power taking power in the Reichstag, and that the enabling resolution that made Hitler a dictator, he counted off the days and hours that the Nazis were in power before they did that, which if in the United States, if it were the same thing, it would have been essentially St. Patty's Day after the inauguration that Trump would have declared himself a dictator. Well, he actually said in that something to the effect of, I'm not saying this just for effect. And so does he actually believe that Trump is a Nazi? I mean, and you see how people reacted to Elon Musk's awkward wave, where they didn't say that was like a Nazi salute. They said, he is a Nazi. He's from South Africa. His father did this. I mean, you're sort of like, what? There's no reality to some of these things. And the thing that's a little concerning, especially in an age when there's already been 2 assassination attempts on the president, is if you're stirring up people who are deluded with more and more lies, more kind of stronger and stronger ideas about the terrible thing these people are doing, none of which is true, something bad could happen as a result of that. I mean, it's certainly not healthy for a democracy to have one party which is systemically lying or deluded, whatever.
Is there, Richard, is there any question in your mind that J.B. Pritzker's running in 2028?
No, I think he clearly is. I mean, unless something happens, I think he intends to run. And it's interesting. He's getting great reviews for being this thing. And what it says about JB is sort of interesting to me. I have always said that he's sort of the needy billionaire, the billionaire that needs to have some affirmation for his happiness. I mean, it kind of goes back to his unfortunate childhood. But I mean, to me, it's sort of an interesting thing about who J.B. Pritzker is that he's willing to say anything in order to gain the adulation of his potential supporters.
Do you think, you've got Gavin Newsom on one side who's sort of walking back some of the, more, let's say, extreme positions of trans stuff, whatever. J.B. Pritzker is leaning in. I mean, he is full bore, 100%. Does that get him? Do you think that makes him a viable candidate in a 2028 primary?
Yeah, look, I mean, historically in the Democratic primary, there's been a competition to who gets the left lane. And if you get the left lane, you're usually in the strongest place to dominate. Now, Joe Biden shifted to the middle, and the party coalesced around him because there was a number of people fighting over who was going to be in the left lane, including his ultimate vice president, Kamala Harris. And so, you look at that and you just say, well, if he can dominate the left lane, and then he's got Gavin Newsom to the middle, but he's the only guy in the left, or there's only one or two, I think that the left wing is where the energy is in that party. I think there's a reason why he's speaking to people that believe these things. I think some of them actually believe it.
So back to the Perry Bacon column, because I read it as well. And he doesn't, he starts by saying that Bernie Sanders is flying around sort of, fighting the oligarchy and the billionaires. And he doesn't get to the fact that J.B. Pritzker is a billionaire until the very last paragraph. And here's what he writes. This is Perry Bacon again. Quote, America desperately needs greater economic equality so that it produces fewer billionaires. And it's even worse when those billionaires use their wealth to dominate politics. I'm not rooting for more governors like J.B. Pritzker, but I'm rooting hard for him right now. To which I responded, what an incoherent mess of a paragraph that is.
Well,
I mean,
by the way, most billionaires are Democrats. Right? I mean, so.
But so I guess to further to the discussion about 2028, is it a problem that he's a billionaire and he's a white guy? And then, like,
could be.
Does that, will Democrats really, even if he's got the right messaging, do those aspects of his persona, character, whatever, work against him?
Yes, and there's no question. And just the way his appearance is going to work against him too. I just think at the end of the day, it's hard to see him breaking through, but if he has the right message and if the opponents are weak enough, he certainly has the money to buy an election. We saw that in Illinois twice, where the Democratic Party is dominated largely as a result of his financing of the Democratic Party in Illinois. So, look, I think a lot of Republicans in Illinois will be happy to see him leave Illinois. But I think the rest of our compadres around this country will be sad to see him starting to spend money in their jurisdictions, promulgating ideas that are premised on delusions. It's not a good situation to be in.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. Again, take a look at Real Clear Politics tomorrow. You can read Richard's column. You can read Perry Bacon's column. You can decide for yourself what you think. That's what we do at Real Clear Politics. Richard Porter, contributor to RCP. Richard, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. And that's going to do it for us. On behalf of Carl and Andy, I'm Tom Bevan. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.